The phrase form is emptiness. Emptiness is form originates from the Heart Sutra, one of the most profound and widely studied texts in Mahayana Buddhism. It expresses a deep philosophical insight into the nature of reality, particularly through the lens of shunyata, or emptiness, a concept explored extensively by the Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna. In our daily lives, we tend to perceive the world as composed of solid, independent objects that exist in and of themselves. We see ourselves as separate individuals with a fixed identity, and we believe that possessions, relationships, and experiences have a lasting essence. However, Buddhism teaches that this is an illusion. All things, including ourselves, exist only in dependence on other factors. This realization is fundamental in the Buddhist path because much of human suffering arises from attachment to things that are impermanent and lack inherent existence. By clinging to people, possessions, or ideas as though they are unchanging, we set ourselves up for disappointment and pain when they inevitably change or disappear. The understanding of form and emptiness allows us to cultivate a more flexible, peaceful, and compassionate approach to life. In Buddhism, form refers to everything that we can perceive with our senses: objects, sounds, smells, textures, tastes, thoughts, and emotions. It includes all material and mental phenomena that appear to exist as distinct and tangible entities. However, the phrase form is emptiness suggests that these things, despite appearing real and solid, do not have an independent, fixed, or permanent nature. Instead, they are empty of inherent existence, meaning they exist only due to causes and conditions. A useful analogy is a car. When we look at a car, we see it as a singular, concrete object. However, if we break it down into its parts, engine, wheels, seats, metal frame, there is no single component that we can point to as the car. The car exists only as a collection of interconnected parts that work together in a functional relationship. Moreover, the car depends on external conditions, such as fuel, maintenance, and a driver. If any of these conditions change or disappear, the car as we know it ceases to exist. Similarly, a tree seems like an independent object, but upon closer examination, it depends on sunlight, soil, water, air, and countless other factors. If any of these conditions were absent, the tree would not exist as it does. This concept applies to everything, including our own identity. We often think of ourselves as having a fixed self, but in reality, we are a constantly changing collection of thoughts, memories, emotions, and bodily processes. Just as a river is always flowing and never exactly the same at any given moment, we too are in constant flux. This realization can help us let go of rigid ideas about ourselves and others, making us more adaptable and open to change. Conversely, emptiness is form reminds us that emptiness does not mean nothingness or non-existence. It does not suggest that the world is an illusion in the sense that nothing is real, but rather that things exist in a fluid, interdependent way. Because all things are empty of a fixed, independent self, they can arise, change, and function in the world. If things had an intrinsic, unchanging essence, they would be static and incapable of transformation. A helpful example is a wave in the ocean. A wave appears as a distinct form, yet it is not separate from the ocean itself. It arises due to wind, water movement, and other conditions, and it dissolves back into the ocean when those conditions change. If we mistakenly believe that a wave has an independent existence, we might try to hold on to it, but this would be futile since its nature is to arise and pass away. Similarly, all aspects of our lives, our relationships, jobs, possessions, and even our emotions, are like waves. They arise due to conditions, stay for a while, and eventually pass. Understanding this can help us engage with life fully, while avoiding excessive attachment or resistance to change. This teaching challenges our habitual way of seeing the world, in which we tend to perceive ourselves and everything around us as distinct, separate, and lasting. The idea that form and emptiness are inseparable offers profound wisdom that can be applied in everyday life. For example, in relationships, we often suffer because we cling to rigid expectations of how people should behave or how things should be. We might get upset when a loved one changes, forgetting that change is an inevitable aspect of existence. By embracing the understanding that everything is impermanent and interconnected, we can cultivate greater patience, understanding, and compassion. In difficult situations, such as losing a job or facing failure, recognizing the emptiness of form helps us realize that these events do not define us permanently. They are simply conditions that arise and pass, just like a wave in the ocean. This perspective can reduce stress and anxiety, allowing us to navigate life's ups and downs with greater ease. By deeply contemplating the meaning of form is emptiness, emptiness is form, we can transform our relationship with the world. Instead of clinging to things as though they are permanent or fearing their impermanence, we can develop a more fluid, adaptable, and compassionate approach to life. This understanding encourages us to engage with the present moment without attachment or aversion, recognizing that everything is interconnected and constantly changing. Ultimately, this wisdom leads to greater inner peace, freedom, and a sense of harmony with the world, helping us to live with a deeper awareness and appreciation of reality as it truly is. One of the main sources of suffering in life is our tendency to cling to things as though they are permanent. Relationships, possessions, status, youth, or even our personal identity. We become attached to people and experiences, believing they define us or that they will last forever. However, when these things inevitably change or disappear, we suffer. By understanding that form is emptiness, we recognize that everything we hold on to is inherently impermanent and interdependent. For example, imagine someone clinging to a romantic relationship as their sole source of happiness. If the relationship ends, they may feel devastated, as if their world has collapsed. However, if they deeply understand that the relationship was always dependent on changing conditions, emotions, life circumstances, personal growth, they can experience its end with acceptance rather than suffering. This does not mean they won't feel pain, but they won't be consumed by despair because they see that everything arises and passes away naturally. A major cause of suffering is the belief in a permanent, independent self, or Atman. We often define ourselves rigidly based on our past, achievements, failures, or societal labels. This attachment to a fixed identity leads to suffering when life doesn't align with our self-concept, when we fail, grow older, or experience loss. Understanding form is emptiness, emptiness is form, allows us to see that our sense of self is not fixed, but a collection of changing experiences, thoughts, and conditions. For example, a person who sees themselves as successful may suffer greatly if they lose their job because they have tied their identity to external achievements. However, if they recognize that their identity is fluid and ever-changing, they can navigate life's ups and downs with greater ease. This insight liberates us from ego-driven suffering and allows us to engage with life more openly and without fear of change. Many people suffer because they fear change, aging, losing loved ones, or uncertainty about the future. This fear stems from the belief that things should remain stable and predictable. However, understanding emptiness's form helps us see that change is not a disruption of reality, but the very nature of reality itself. For example, the seasons change from spring to summer to fall, yet we do not mourn the passing of spring, because we understand that this cycle is natural. Similarly, in our own lives, everything arises and dissolves according to conditions. If we embrace this truth, we no longer resist change, but flow with it. This acceptance removes unnecessary suffering caused by resistance and attachment. Much of our suffering comes from interpersonal conflicts, expecting people to behave a certain way, holding grudges, or feeling betrayed. These struggles often arise from viewing others as fixed, unchanging entities. However, if we understand emptiness, we see that people, like everything else, are constantly changing and shaped by conditions. For instance, if someone is rude to us, instead of reacting with anger or resentment, we can recognize that their behavior arises from their own experiences, emotions, and struggles. This doesn't mean we excuse harmful behavior, but we stop taking things personally and respond with greater compassion and wisdom. By seeing people as empty of inherent nature, we cultivate more patience, understanding, and forgiveness. Ultimately, deeply realizing form is emptiness, emptiness is form, brings a profound sense of freedom, peace, and joy. When we stop grasping at things as permanent, we naturally become more present, appreciative, and open-hearted. We engage with life fully, but without unhealthy attachment. For example, when eating a meal, instead of worrying about when it will end or wishing for something better, we can fully appreciate each bite, knowing that it is temporary but precious. When spending time with loved ones, we cherish the moment rather than fearing future separation. This awareness allows us to experience life with gratitude rather than anxiety, knowing that every experience, no matter how fleeting, is meaningful. By understanding that form is emptiness, emptiness is form, we free ourselves from attachment, ego clinging, and fear of change, the core causes of suffering. This insight enables us to engage with life fully, yet without clinging, leading to greater peace, resilience, and compassion. Instead of resisting the natural flow of existence, we align ourselves with it, experiencing reality as it truly is, interconnected, dynamic, and beautifully impermanent. This is the heart of Buddhist liberation, not escaping from the world, but seeing it with clarity and wisdom, so that we may live with freedom and joy in every moment.